When Dr. Vincent Harper became Nashville's most trusted pharmacist, patients relied on him for life-saving medications. But when his opioid addiction and insurance fraud spiraled into murder, he began filling prescriptions with deadly compounds and poisonous substitutes, turning healing into a deadly game of pharmaceutical roulette. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. The humid Tennessee summer evening cast long shadows across the parking lot of Harper Family Pharmacy, as Dr. Vincent Harper counted the day's prescription bottles and prepared the medication inventory for what would become the most dangerous shift of his 22-year career as Nashville's most respected independent pharmacist and community healthcare provider. At 51 years old, Vincent had established himself as Music City's premier neighborhood pharmacist, specializing in personalized medication management and compounding services that attracted elderly patients, chronic pain sufferers, and healthcare professionals who valued his expertise in complex pharmaceutical interactions and custom drug preparations. Vincent's pharmacy occupied a converted Victorian house in Nashville's historic Hillsborough Village district, featuring a traditional apothecary counter, vintage pharmaceutical equipment, and a modern compounding laboratory where he prepared custom medications that couldn't be obtained through chain pharmacies or hospital systems. His patient roster included prominent country music stars who required discretion about their prescription needs, elderly socialites who depended on his home delivery services, and fellow healthcare professionals who trusted his expertise in managing complex medication regimens that required specialized knowledge and careful monitoring. The interior of Harper Family Pharmacy reflected Vincent's dedication to traditional pharmaceutical practice and his understanding of patients' needs for personalized healthcare attention, featuring hand-carved wooden shelving, antique medicine bottles, and detailed patient consultation records that documented his careful attention to drug interactions, dosage adjustments, and therapeutic outcomes. His walls displayed his Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Vanderbilt University, certifications from specialized compounding organizations, and thank you letters from patients whose lives had been improved through his pharmaceutical expertise and compassionate care. But beneath Vincent's reputation for pharmaceutical excellence lay a dangerous combination of opioid addiction, insurance fraud, and systematic murder that had transformed him into one of Nashville's most prolific poisoners. "Good evening, Dr. Harper," said Margaret Foster, his regular 7 o'clock prescription pickup and a 79-year-old retired opera singer whose complex medical conditions required multiple prescription medications that Vincent had been managing for over 8 years. Margaret was worth approximately $12 million from her deceased husband's music publishing empire, and had grown to depend on Vincent not just for pharmaceutical services, but also for health consultations and medication education that helped her navigate the complexities of aging and chronic illness management. "Good evening, Margaret," Vincent replied with the professional warmth and medical expertise that had made him legendary among Nashville's healthcare-dependent community and had earned him recognition as one of Tennessee's most knowledgeable and trusted independent pharmacists. "I've prepared your monthly medication organizers with some important adjustments to your blood pressure regimen that should help reduce the side effects you've been experiencing while maintaining optimal therapeutic outcomes for your cardiac health." Margaret had become Vincent's most valuable target, not because of her medical needs or her demanding personality, but because of her practice of paying for expensive medications with cash to maintain privacy about her health conditions, and her recent decision to include Vincent's pharmacy in her will as appreciation for his life-saving care and dedication during her most vulnerable health crises. What Margaret didn't know was that Vincent had been systematically poisoning patients for over 18 months, using his pharmaceutical expertise and access to controlled substances to eliminate clients whose deaths would provide access to insurance payouts and inheritance money. Vincent's transformation from trusted pharmacist to calculating killer had begun 3 years earlier, when his own prescription opioid addiction had escalated from legitimate pain management following a back injury to daily dependency on fentanyl and other powerful narcotics that he diverted from his pharmacy's inventory. His drug habit had grown to consume over $5,000 worth of controlled substances per week, while his gambling addiction at riverboat casinos had resulted in losses exceeding $300,000 that threatened both his pharmacy license and his personal safety. Faced with financial ruin, potential loss of his professional license, and threats from organized crime figures who had been supplying him with additional drugs, Vincent had developed a complex scheme involving insurance fraud, systematic patient poisoning, and inheritance manipulation that would eliminate potential witnesses while generating substantial profits through fraudulent death benefits and estate planning manipulation. His first victim had been Dr. Patricia Williams, an elderly physician who had discovered Vincent's drug diversion activities during a routine prescription consultation and had threatened to report his illegal activities to the Tennessee Board of Pharmacy. Vincent had murdered her by deliberately substituting her heart medication with a toxic compound that had caused fatal cardiac arrhythmia while appearing to be a natural progression of her existing cardiovascular disease. The success of his first murder had convinced Vincent that killing suspicious or wealthy patients was both necessary for protecting his drug operation and extremely profitable when combined with systematic insurance fraud and inheritance manipulation. Over the following 18 months, Vincent had murdered 12 additional patients using increasingly sophisticated pharmaceutical techniques that took advantage of his expertise in drug interactions, toxic compounds, and the trust that patients placed in his professional medication management. His victims had been carefully selected based on their wealth, their lack of close family oversight, and their medical conditions that would provide plausible explanations for unexpected deaths during routine pharmaceutical care. His victims had included Robert Chen, a tech executive whose insulin had been systematically replaced with concentrated glucose solutions that had caused fatal diabetic complications; Jennifer Martinez, a prominent attorney whose blood thinners had been substituted with coagulation enhancers that had caused massive stroke; and David Park, a wealthy businessman whose pain medications had been replaced with compounds containing ricin that had caused fatal organ failure over several weeks. Dr. Harper, I need to discuss some serious concerns about unusual patterns in patient outcomes and medication-related deaths that have been reported in connection with your pharmacy, said Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the Tennessee Department of Health's Pharmaceutical Oversight Director, who had been conducting routine audits of independent pharmacies and had begun noticing statistical anomalies in Vincent's patient mortality rates and controlled substance inventory management. Dr. Rodriguez possessed extensive expertise in pharmaceutical regulation and had authority to investigate suspicious activities involving controlled substances and patient care. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation represented an existential threat to Vincent's criminal operation, as her regulatory authority and access to pharmaceutical databases could expose both his drug diversion activities and his systematic patient poisoning. Of course, Dr. Rodriguez, Vincent replied, though he felt the familiar surge of panic and desperation that accompanied any regulatory scrutiny of his pharmaceutical practices by officials who possessed the expertise and authority to detect criminal activities involving controlled substances and patient care. Patient safety is always my highest priority, and I'm committed to maintaining the strictest standards of pharmaceutical practice and medication management in accordance with all applicable regulations and professional guidelines. Dr. Rodriguez consulted detailed audit reports and statistical analyses that showed impossible patterns in controlled substance usage, patient mortality rates, and insurance claims that suggested systematic pharmaceutical fraud rather than legitimate medication management and patient care outcomes. Vincent, I've been analyzing data from your pharmacy operations over the past 18 months, and I've discovered some extremely concerning patterns that warrant immediate investigation, Dr. Rodriguez said, with the regulatory authority that had made her successful in identifying fraudulent pharmaceutical operations. 13 of your regular patients have died from medication-related complications that don't match their prescribed treatment protocols, with most showing evidence of drug substitution or contamination that suggests deliberate pharmaceutical tampering. Additionally, your controlled substance inventory shows discrepancies that indicate systematic drug diversion for illegal purposes. The regulatory investigator's identification of the medication tampering patterns and her recognition of the controlled substance diversions confirmed Vincent's worst fears that his criminal activities had been detected through pharmaceutical oversight systems and would soon be reported to law enforcement agencies with expertise in medical crimes. Vincent's response was swift and desperate as he realized that eliminating Dr. Rodriguez was essential for protecting his criminal operation and preventing exposure of his systematic drug diversion and patient murder spree. Dr. Rodriguez, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the complexities of compounding pharmacy operations and the challenges of managing patients with multiple chronic conditions, Vincent said, while discreetly reaching for a prepared syringe containing concentrated digoxin that he kept hidden in his compounding laboratory for emergency elimination of regulatory threats. Perhaps we could review some specific case studies in my compounding facility where I can demonstrate the advanced pharmaceutical techniques that might explain these statistical variations. I have detailed documentation that should clarify any apparent irregularities in my patient care protocols. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to examine Vincent's compounding documentation, not realizing that the pharmacist was leading her into his private laboratory where previous murders had been planned and where he intended to inject her with the concentrated digoxin that would cause fatal cardiac arrest while appearing to be a heart attack brought on by the stress of regulatory investigation work. Vincent's plan involved injecting Dr. Rodriguez with the digoxin solution while she was examining his compounding equipment, causing immediate cardiac failure that would be attributed to the occupational hazards of pharmaceutical regulation rather than deliberate murder by a drug-addicted pharmacist. But Vincent's carefully planned murder of the regulatory investigator was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of DEA agents who had been investigating prescription drug diversion networks and had identified connections to Vincent's suspicious activities. Special Agent Michael Torres of the DEA's Pharmaceutical Crimes Division had been conducting a comprehensive investigation into prescription opioid diversion and illegal distribution networks operating through independent pharmacies in Tennessee and surrounding states. Agent Torres specialized in investigating healthcare professionals who diverted controlled substances for personal use or illegal distribution, and had developed expertise in tracking pharmaceutical crimes through prescription monitoring systems and insurance fraud detection. The federal investigation had been initiated by reports from multiple law enforcement agencies and insurance companies who had noticed unusual patterns of controlled substance prescriptions and patient deaths associated with specific pharmacies and healthcare providers. The investigation had focused on Vincent's pharmacy after discovering that he had been ordering quantities of controlled substances that far exceeded legitimate patient care needs while being associated with unusually high rates of patient deaths. Agent Torres had been conducting surveillance of Vincent's operations and had documented evidence of drug diversion, insurance fraud, and suspicious patterns of patient deaths that suggested his pharmaceutical expertise was being used for systematic criminal activity rather than legitimate patient care. Dr. Harper, I'm Special Agent Torres with the DEA, he announced as he entered the compounding laboratory where Vincent was preparing to murder Dr. Rodriguez. I have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of illegal distribution of controlled substances, healthcare fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of first-degree murder related to your systematic abuse of pharmaceutical authority and patient trust. Vincent's reaction to the federal agent's intervention was a combination of complete terror and desperate attempts to maintain his professional credibility, as he realized that law enforcement agencies had been investigating his drug diversion activities and had connected them to systematic patient murders. His carefully maintained reputation as a trusted community pharmacist had failed to protect him from federal investigation into his criminal pharmaceutical activities. Special Agent Torres, there must be some serious misunderstanding about legitimate pharmaceutical practice and the complexities of managing patients with chronic pain and terminal illnesses, Vincent said frantically while abandoning his plan to murder Dr. Rodriguez and attempting to preserve some semblance of professional dignity, despite the overwhelming evidence against his criminal enterprise. I'm a licensed doctor of pharmacy with 22 years of experience, providing compassionate care for Nashville's most vulnerable patients. All of my pharmaceutical activities follow established protocols for controlled substance management and patient safety that are designed to prevent drug abuse while ensuring appropriate pain management and therapeutic outcomes. Dr. Rodriguez looked absolutely stunned as she realized how close she had come to being murdered by the pharmacist she had been investigating for regulatory violations. Her pharmaceutical oversight had not only exposed Vincent's systematic drug diversion and patient murder spree, but had also prevented her own death at the hands of a killer who had been using his pharmaceutical expertise to eliminate regulatory threats and vulnerable patients. The comprehensive investigation that followed Vincent's arrest revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise and the sophisticated methods he had developed to exploit pharmaceutical knowledge for systematic drug diversion and murder. Forensic analysis of Vincent's pharmacy and compounding laboratory revealed extensive evidence of his drug manufacturing and distribution operations, including stockpiles of diverted controlled substances, equipment for producing counterfeit medications, and detailed records showing systematic substitution of legitimate medications with toxic compounds designed to kill specific patients. His personal belongings included drug paraphernalia, large amounts of cash, and detailed profiles of wealthy patients who had been targeted for systematic poisoning. The investigation also uncovered Vincent's connections to organized crime figures who had been purchasing diverted prescription drugs and had provided information about patients who might be suitable targets for inheritance fraud and murder. His criminal network included corrupt healthcare workers who had helped identify vulnerable patients and dishonest insurance agents who had facilitated fraudulent death benefit claims. Most disturbing was the discovery of Vincent's extensive research into pharmaceutical toxicology and his development of increasingly sophisticated methods for administering lethal compounds through routine medication dispensing that would be virtually undetectable during standard autopsy examinations unless specifically tested for exotic pharmaceutical toxins. Dr. Vincent Harper was ultimately convicted of 13 counts of first-degree murder, illegal distribution of controlled substances, healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit organized criminal activity, and numerous other charges related to his systematic exploitation of pharmaceutical authority and patient trust. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout Tennessee's pharmaceutical and healthcare communities, prompting immediate reforms in pharmacy oversight, controlled substance monitoring, and patient protection protocols. The case became a landmark example of how trusted healthcare professionals could systematically exploit their pharmaceutical expertise and patient relationships to commit large-scale drug diversion and murder while hiding behind the facade of compassionate medical care. Several other independent pharmacies and compounding facilities were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of pharmaceutical operations and new requirements for real-time monitoring of controlled substance handling that made it more difficult for pharmacists to divert drugs or tamper with patient medications. Dr. Rodriguez and Special Agent Torres received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in pharmaceutical crime investigation, developing new techniques for identifying drug diversion operations and protecting patients from exploitation by unethical healthcare providers who abused their access to controlled substances. Margaret Foster and other surviving patients required extensive medical evaluation and psychological counseling to overcome the trauma of learning that their trusted pharmacist had been systematically poisoning them while stealing controlled substances and planning to profit from their deaths. The pharmaceutical industry implemented comprehensive new safety protocols designed to protect patients from exploitation by unethical practitioners. The case prompted comprehensive changes in pharmaceutical regulation, including mandatory real-time monitoring of all controlled substance transactions, enhanced background screening for pharmacy professionals, psychological evaluation requirements for license renewal, and new reporting procedures for suspicious patient deaths or medication-related complications. Vincent's conviction also led to increased cooperation between pharmaceutical licensing boards and law enforcement agencies investigating medical crimes, with new protocols designed to identify healthcare professionals who might be abusing their access to controlled substances and vulnerable patients for criminal purposes. The pharmacy and broader healthcare industries implemented revolutionary new safety measures, including enhanced security for controlled substance storage, mandatory patient notification systems for medication changes, comprehensive patient advocacy programs, and improved training for recognizing signs of substance abuse and criminal behavior among healthcare professionals. 5 years after Vincent's conviction and life imprisonment, Nashville's pharmaceutical community continued to implement safeguards designed to protect patients from pharmacists who might abuse their positions of trust and pharmaceutical expertise for criminal purposes. The pharmacist, who had promised to heal and protect through the careful preparation and dispensing of life-saving medications, had instead used his pharmaceutical knowledge and position of trust to commit systematic murder and drug trafficking against the very patients who had depended on him for their most essential healthcare needs. However, his crimes had been thoroughly exposed and his victims had found justice through the dedication of regulatory investigators who refused to accept suspicious pharmaceutical deaths as mere medical complications. Vincent Harper's lethal prescriptions had been permanently canceled, and their author sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, proving that even healthcare professionals who attempted to exploit their pharmaceutical expertise for criminal gain could be identified, investigated, and brought to justice when dedicated oversight agencies and law enforcement worked together to protect innocent patients from predatory medical practitioners. The pharmacist's lethal prescriptions had become his final medication of justice, serving as a lasting reminder that the sacred trust between healthcare providers and their patients must never be violated, and that those who would abuse pharmaceutical knowledge to cause harm will ultimately face the full consequences of their betrayal of the fundamental medical principle that healers must first do no harm. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.